Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this virtual session of the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. I'm Alberto Ibargüen, president of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which is dedicated to strengthening democracy by supporting informed and engaged communities. In service of that mission, we encourage dialogue on critical issues, including free expression, trust, media, and democracy. And as part of that, the Knight Commission has been an important platform for the discussion of values and ethics in our diverse society. And that includes American values of fairness, racial and gender equity, and education, converging and sometimes conflicting in college athletics. The commission was founded in 1989, and from the beginning, Knight Foundation has been its sole supporter. That has given the commission freedom to act independently, and in turn, the commission has developed a legacy of propelling transformational change, both through its thought leadership and through a series of policy recommendations. Today's session continues that tradition. In fact, today's session also sets a new record of some 870 people registered for the discussion. So thank you, virtual reality and digital connections and everything else. I'm very, very pleased that we're all here. To begin today's session, I want to acknowledge our two new co-chairs of the commission, Len Elmore and Nancy Zimpher. In January, they'll take up the mantle alongside current co-chair Arne Duncan. Len is a leader with wide experience in college athletics and many years as a member of the commission. He was a college basketball All-American and later a professional athlete, an attorney, and an educator. Nancy brings a wealth of higher education leadership. She is Chancellor Emeritus of the State University of New York and the former president of not one, but two Division I universities. Their combined resumes, along with former Secretary of Education and Chicago public school leader Arne Duncan, gives us the absolutely perfect set of leaders for this commission. And last and truly not least, I'd like to say a special word of thanks yet one more time to Cartwright, who is stepping down from the commission after serving for nearly 20 years, the last 3 of which she served as co-chair. Her steady and wise counsel has been a tremendous asset to the commission. She's been critically important in the development of recommendations that help drive major policy reform in governance, academic standards, and revenue distribution, all the way from her start on the commission to the recommendations you'll discuss today. We're grateful to Carol for her service and her leadership. And now I'm pleased to turn the program over to Len Elmore.
Thank you, Alberto. The Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics has a 30-year history of leading major reforms in college sports. The commission's work has included influential reports with recommendations impacting a wide range of issues, embedding presidential leadership in college sports at all levels, boosting academic success among college athletes, aligning revenue distributions with educational values, and bolstering athletics programs' financial transparency. Today, we are releasing another major Knight Commission report entitled Transforming the NCAA D1 Model, Recommendations for Change. Today's session is the capstone of our 4-part series. The previous 3 sessions have outlined the results of the Commission's 12-month study to consider the governance and structure of NCAA Division I. This in-depth examination was started last December in light of the many challenges that Division I was facing, even before the COVID-19 outbreak. The impact of the pandemic has created even greater urgency for action. Our work has benefited from the diverse experience our 22-member commission has across all of college athletics, higher education, and professional sports. Among the titles our current members have held or still hold include University President and Chancellor, the Secretary of Education, athletics director, faculty athletics representative, head coach, board of trustee member and chair, university general counsel, and senior leaders in pro sports. In addition to these leadership roles, 2/3 of our members were collegiate athletes in a variety of sports: men's and women's basketball, baseball, men's and women's track and field, women's tennis, and football. Most of these athletes played in Division I, including 3 at the FBS football level. We all benefited from our involvement with college athletics, and those experiences are central to why we devote our time and energy to identify solutions to make college sports better for athletes and their institutions. Building upon our long history of independent research and deliberation, our examination over the past year has included the following efforts: designing principles to guide new rules for the use of college athletes' name, image, and likeness; conducting focus group discussions and a major survey of Division I presidents and college sports leaders; commissioning an analysis of the NCAA's revenue distribution formula and proposing changes; evaluating and presenting extensive Division I college sports financial data; assessing proposals for athletics reform made by national scholars and other organizations. All of this work influenced the recommendations we are announcing today. Our report and all of our prior work are accessible on our website, knightcommission.org. Today, we will hear from Dr. Nancy Zimpher, Knight Commission member and chair of the Commission's College Sports Governance and Structure Committee; Michael Cross, Knight Commission consultant; Dr. Carol Cartwright and Arne Duncan, co-chairs of the Knight Commission; and Commission members Peter Roby and Jacques McClendon. Now, before I turn this over to our presenters, I want to remind you of a few housekeeping items. If you have a question, please click on the Q&A icon on your control panel. You can submit your question at any time. We will answer questions at the conclusion of our presentation, so please identify your name and affiliation with your question. Today's session is being recorded and will be posted on our website. I will now turn it over to Nancy Zimpher.
Thanks, Lynn, and good afternoon, everybody. As Lynn noted, we are pleased to announce major recommendations to culminate our Transforming the NCAA Division I Model series. These recommendations received unanimous support from our Knight Commission members, and as a result of our year-long study, we concluded that the governance of NCAA Division I has not kept pace with the rapid commercial growth of college sports. Now is the time for fundamental, far-reaching structural and governance change that will provide the big solutions that college leaders themselves seek. Today, the Knight Commission is advancing 3 major recommendations to transform NCAA Division I by providing principled national athletics governance that prioritizes the education, health, safety, and success of college athletes. Recommendation number 1 is to create a new separate entity to govern only the sport of FBS football. This new entity would be completely independent of the NCAA and funded by the college football playoff revenues. It would govern the sport of college football currently operating in the Football Bowl subdivision. This new governing entity would conduct all FBS sport operations, including its national championship, and manage all issues related to FBS football, athletic education, health, safety, revenue distribution, litigation, eligibility, and enforcement. Recommendation number 2 is that the NCAA govern all other sports under a reorganized governance system, including for those institutions that offer FBS football. The NCAA will govern and conduct national operations and championships for all Division I sports, including football, at the Football Championship subdivision or the FCS level. The new governance system should establish equal voting representation for all Division I conferences, replacing the current weighted voting that FBS conferences receive. The NCAA Division I men's basketball tournament should be retained in its current structure, which is an essential outcome that D1 leaders expressed in our survey. The D1 membership in all sports except FBS football should remain the same. To reiterate, institutions currently classified in the FBS will remain full NCAA D1 members in all sports except football. Recommendation number 3. It offers 10 recommended principles that governance entities should adopt. These principles recognize college athletics as a public trust rooted in the mission of higher education. This slide highlights the first 5 principles. First, national governance should recognize athletes as students first, prioritize their education, health, safety, and success, and require them to make satisfactory progress toward a degree. Governing entities should prohibit pay for play, but allow institutional support tethered to education. Also, college athletes should be allowed to earn compensation similar to how other students may do so, such as through the use of their names, images, and likenesses. The next 2 principles emphasize the importance of demonstrating and advancing strong commitments to racial and gender equity. National governance should reflect appropriate voting power and hold presidents responsible for leading athletics programs. Governance should include a meaningful representation of college athletes and be governed by a majority of independent directors. And finally, national governance should control all aspects of any sport it administers, including its national championships and revenues. Distributions of those revenues should advance educational missions and opportunities for athletes. As you can see, these recommendations are bold, and we recognize that change of this magnitude will not be easy, but we believe it is urgently needed. As you will hear, and as it has become obvious to many over the course of this unusual year, no single entity is responsible for the most powerful sport in college athletics, FBS football. It is time to change this. When all the facts are woven together, they provide a clear rationale for why it is time for the governing structures to evolve in the ways that we recommend, to benefit all of college sports and the sport of football itself. So now I will turn it over to Michael Cross, who will share the rationale for change. Michael?
Thank you, Nancy. I want to take a few minutes and provide some of the rationale for how the Commission arrived at these recommendations by simplifying the complicated role of the highest level of football throughout the NCAA's history, explaining its impact on finances and the current governance structure, and sharing data from our recent groundbreaking survey of Division I leaders, including presidents and athletics directors, that provides insight to the current climate for reform. The current structure of Division I college athletics, illustrated by this graphic, barely scratches the surface of how truly complicated NCAA governance is. The NCAA oversees the regulatory functions and support services for 1,000 institutions in 3 divisions and across more than 30 men's and women's sports, including FBS football. The primary revenue stream is the March Madness media contract. This funding allows the NCAA to provide a significant annual distribution of nearly $600 million to its Division I members. This funding also supports one of the NCAA's core functions, operating national championships in recognized NCAA sports except one, the FBS football championship, which is operated by the College Football Playoff. So how did we get to such a complex system? Since the NCAA's 1906 founding, in response to President Theodore Roosevelt's demand that leaders either make the sport safer or abolish it, college football has had a unique place in the history of the NCAA. Dating back to the start of the NCAA's football television plan in 1952, the NCAA controlled the television rights of major college football. In 1984, the NCAA's own members sued the NCAA, resulting in a landmark Supreme Court decision stripping the NCAA of its authority over football TV rights, triggering lucrative conference-driven media deals. The Bowl Championship Series launched the modern era of college football with a guaranteed on-field championship format. In 2007, the first ever conference TV network sparked conference realignment based on football media markets. And finally, the first college football playoff in 2015 solidified football's financial autonomy outside the NCAA with a 12-year, $7.3 billion contract with ESPN. The first significant milestone in NCAA governance was establishing the current NCAA Divisions 1, 2, and 3 in 1973 to provide an opportunity for schools to, and I'll quote, align with like-minded campuses in the areas of philosophy, competition, and opportunity. In 1996, Division I moved from one institution, one vote, to a conference-based representative form of governance with weighted voting for the FBS football schools. This move organized governance around FBS football rather than the sport sponsored by every D1 school and the sport that funds the NCAA, basketball. And finally, in 2014, Division I granted legislative autonomy to the Power 5 conferences, allowing them flexibility to make their own rules in certain areas. The impact of FBS football on the finances and governance of college athletics is unmistakable. Throughout the history of college athletics, pursuit of football revenue has driven groundbreaking conference media deals, punctuated by the creation of a true on-field national championship, providing a tsunami of revenue to the Power 5, the most financially successful college football conferences. This chart tracks only 2 Power 5 revenue sources over just the past 15 years. Conference-generated revenues from media contracts and postseason football, including the CFP, shown in blue, and NCAA distributions to these conferences from March Madness revenues, shown in red. As you can see on the left, in 2005, Power 5 generated revenue distributions from media rights and postseason football were 4 times greater than distributions from NCAA March Madness. Nearly 15 years later, conference-generated and CFP revenue distributions have soared past $2.5 billion annually, generating more than 10 times the revenue distributed from March Madness, which itself doubled during the same time period. FBS football media rights deals and the CFP National Championship have resulted in revenue disparities within Division I and soaring spending in Power 5 programs. In 2019, Division I athletics budgets nationally ranged from $4 million to $220 million. Even within the 130-member FBS subdivision, budgets range from $16 million to the highest, 14 times greater at $220 million. According to NCAA data, athletics expenses at all FBS schools have outpaced generated revenues. Power 5 programs in particular spent these increased revenues disproportionately on coaching salaries, administrative salaries, and funding facility improvements. As an example of the disproportionate spending, the top line in green shows salaries for the 510 head and assistant football coaches at 51 public Power 5 schools increased more than 93% from 2009 to 2018. This equates to an average salary for the 10 allowable coaches at each program of just under $1 million per position. The football coaching salary growth rate far exceeds increases in other spending in comparison to both total athletic spending, shown in blue, and academic spending, shown in orange. Overspending on salaries and other expenses to keep up with competitors is a concern for nearly 60% of survey respondents in their FBS football programs, and more than half of all respondents said occurs in basketball programs. Overspending can lead many institutions to rely heavily on student fees and institutional funding to fill a revenue gap, especially in the Group of 5 conferences, which make up half of the FBS, but whose financial model is very different from the Power 5. Media rights and ticket sales represent more than half of the Power 5's primary revenue resources. Conversely, FBS Group of 5 schools receive more than 60% of their athletics budget support from internal funding sources, primarily student fees and general institutional support. In our survey of Division I leaders, 63% of Group of 5 respondents are concerned that reliance on these internal allocations is greater than it should be, with the majority of D1 schools unable to generate revenues to cover all expenses. The history and evolution of FBS football and its impact on finances and governance we've covered to this point has created a powerful and unique relationship between FBS football, the NCAA, and the college football playoff. FBS football conducts its national championship through an independent LLC free from NCAA involvement and undistracted by any regulatory responsibilities, receiving more than $460 million annually from the CFP, with no restrictions on how the money can be used. At the same time, FBS programs benefit from the NCAA's annual revenue distribution, which in 2019 was $343 million to all 130 FBS programs. Of this amount, more than $60 million was attributable to the methodology of the NCAA's formula for counting the sport of FBS football and the scholarships provided to FBS football players, as explained in session 2 of our series. In addition to massive revenue, the sport of FBS football receives free support services from the NCAA, including rules enforcement, eligibility, concussion research, and significant indemnification for their high-risk, high-injury sport. The NCAA revenue distributions and beneficial free national services are reinforced through FBS institutions' control of NCAA governance that provides them with weighted voting power and disproportionate representation throughout the entire Division I structure, including championship selection committees. Our survey of Division I leaders asked D1 leaders what they think of the critical issues just reviewed. Their responses reveal a climate ready for change. Only 22% of all D1 leaders surveyed are satisfied with the NCAA distribution, and only 1 in 4 FBS respondents is satisfied with the current CFP revenue distributions. Only respondents from the Power 5 institutions are satisfied. Only 1/3 of Division I leaders are satisfied with the governance of Division I college sports. Leadership from the non-FBS schools strongly support governance reform, with more than 80% saying weighted voting arrangements that favor FBS institutions are inappropriate. The impact of FBS football was a key factor in each of the areas of dissatisfaction among survey respondents. Another major finding that reveals the fragile state of Division I is that respondents believe there is an absence of common values. 84% of respondents believe their own athletics program is in alignment with the core mission of their institution, but institutional alignment doesn't translate to alignment among Division I schools. Only 1/3 of respondents agree that Division I schools have common values about what intercollegiate athletics should be at an educational institution. The absence of common values brings us full circle to the rationale offered in 1973 for creating 3 NCAA divisions, and again I'll quote, aligning like-minded campuses in the areas of philosophy, competition, and opportunity. This major reorganization nearly 50 years ago was a big solution for its time, and our survey revealed that D1 leaders believe it is time for another big solution. The financial and governance concerns identified by D1 leaders in our survey led nearly 3 in 4 respondents to agree they would like to see reform to the governance, organizational, and competitive structures of Division I. They believe the crisis created by the pandemic presents, quote, the perfect time to address these issues, and nearly 8 in 10 survey respondents prefer big solutions over incremental change. What we're proposing offers a specific big solution that avoids the history of incremental changes that have contributed to the current state of governance, provides the association and institutions the opportunity to evaluate and better align its revenue distributions and financial models, can restore faith in the governance of both the NCAA and FBS football, and responds to the current climate that desires macro-level changes and big solutions so many are seeking, positioning both organizations to better respond to the issues confronting college athletics and FBS football. We now turn to Knight Commission Co-Chair Carol Cartwright to address the benefits of our recommendations.
Thanks, Michael. Our case for change makes clear that we can best achieve our goals with the logical final step in big time football's evolution. That is separating all governance of FBS football from NCAA governance of all other sports. Before I share more information about our recommended model and what we believe will be the benefits, let me mention that the Commission considered a range of solutions, such as pursuit of an antitrust exemption and major reorganizations within the NCAA, including a new NCAA division for the Power Five in all sports except basketball. This slide shows our recommended model. And for the sake of simplicity, we have dubbed the new governing entity as the National College Football Association. It's an easy acronym, the NCFA. In this model, NCAA Division I will be able to act independently of the concerns of FBS football, and the NCFA will be able to effectively shape the future of that unique sport. Each will be a complete and coherent structure, in contrast to the current fragmented system. So what are the benefits and desired outcomes of the change? First, this is simultaneously the most significant and the most effective of the many reforms that we consider for these reasons. Division I can make the change on its own without federal or state governmental approval or extensive NCAA reorganization. And the NCFA can build on the current independent CFP structure. The Division I men's and women's basketball championships and the use of their revenues to support broad-based athletics programs are unchanged, as a large majority of our survey respondents believe to be essential. The NCAA will continue its operations for all D1 sports other than FBS football, and its governance will be organized around basketball affiliations, the sport sponsored by 100% of its members, and the sport that's responsible for the vast majority of NCAA revenues. So let's look at the benefits that accrue specifically to the new NCFA. This change will make FBS football governance complete and unified to more effectively shape the future of the sport. An independent FBS football group that conducts both its championship and its administration will be able to account for the best interests of its business model and to apply its revenues to support athletes' academic success, for their safety, health, and well-being, and for advancing racial equity. It will have clear public accountability. Currently, no single entity is responsible for all aspects of FBS football, diluting public accountability. And this restructuring will give FBS football programs a reset opportunity as to whether they want to compete at the new NCFA level or remain with the NCAA for football. So now let's turn our attention to some additional benefits to the NCAA. NCAA governance will be restructured to provide more equitable voting power and representation. and to better focus on the sport that provides revenues for all its operations. This change will also eliminate the distorting effect of FBS football on the NCAA budget and its revenue distribution to D1 members in the following ways. Removing the sport of FBS football from NCAA revenue distribution calculations, as the Commission has previously recommended, since the NCAA does not conduct the sport's national championship. The NCAA will no longer incur national operating expenses in support of FBS football. The NCAA and the schools that do not offer FBS football no longer will incur legal liabilities and costs for lawsuits relating to that sport. All these changes will free up tens of millions of dollars for redistribution to institutions and conferences through potential new values-based distributions, including incentives to grow and preserve broad-based sports opportunities, a change that could improve the current environment where opportunities in D1 sports are shrinking. For both the NCAA and the NCFA, each will benefit from being an independent, unified governance structure for the sports that it oversees, replacing the current fragmented system. It's important to point out that more than 185,000 college athletes participate in Division I sports, but only 8% participate in FBS football. The proposed reorganized NCAA governance will more effectively serve the vast majority of Division I college athletes. All of these sports will benefit from greater alignment around shared values. The benefits extend well beyond principled and better focused administration. The change is the essential first step that opens the door for tailored solutions that can address the unique needs of each structure and the college athletes they serve. For example, the entities may determine it is necessary to seek antitrust protection to cap coaching salaries. These are decisions best decided after the new structures are formed, not before. We cannot emphasize enough the importance of key findings from our D1 Leaders Survey. D1 respondents favor reform in NCAA Division I governance and organizational competitive structures. They prefer, and I quote, big solutions to incremental change. And they believe the crisis created by the pandemic creates, and again, I quote, the perfect time to address these issues. Now I'll turn it over to Peter Roby to provide the AD's perspective.
Thank you, Nancy. As background, I worked in college sports for more than 40 years as a coach and administrator, including more than a decade as a Division I AD with many years of service on various committees in the NCAA governance structure. I'd like to briefly answer some key questions that administrators may have about the national governance changes being recommended. How will the change impact the current structure of athletics on campus? Institutions with membership in both the NCAA and the new NCFA may structure their campus's athletics governance as they wish, just as they do now, with institutional boards and presidents remaining fully accountable for all intercollegiate athletics activities on their campuses. How would this affect Title IX? The Commission's governance principles are clear that all athletics programs at post-secondary institutions should demonstrate and advance commitments to bolster gender equity in college sports and must comply with Title IX and other applicable laws and regulations. What are the benefits from a management standpoint? We believe this new structure will give administrators a better opportunity to address the unique needs of sports in those organizations. One important outcomes from a Division AD's perspective is aligned NCAA governance around the sport of basketball. Basketball is the only sport that Division I school offers. It's critical that the NCAA be able to give more focused attention to the integrity of the sport. What are the financial implications for athletic directors? The concept is to better align responsibility and authority and values with financial resources. Each governance entity will be aligned around the key revenue drivers for which it now will have responsibility and appropriate authority. On a campus level, the new structure could provide cost savings by allowing greater scheduling flexibility and geographic cohesion, untethering competitive affiliations for other sports that now are tied primarily to football interests. This change could produce cost efficiencies, reduce excessive athletic travel, and encourage regional rivalries. Our survey found that leaders are eager for this type of flexibility. As a former AD, I also see many other potential benefits because more NCAA revenues will be available to be distributed, and there are opportunities to align those benefits in ways that strengthen the core values of college sports. I'd like to turn it over now to my fellow Knight Commission colleague, Jacques McClendon, to emphasize the benefits for athletes and talk about next steps.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate you. As background, I played football at the University of Tennessee, where I earned a bachelor's degree in economics and a master's degree in sports administration. I benefited greatly from my student athlete experience. I played 7 years in the National Football League and then made a transition into sports administration. I'm currently serving as Director of Player Engagement with the Los Angeles Rams. I believe this recommended structure will better serve college football players because there will be a unified entity to address the unique needs of the sports. It is imperative that this new entity include more seats and voting power for college athletes and for independent directors who may include former football players as recommended in the Knights Commission principles. The commission believes that athletes' voices and representation matter, and that athletes in FBS football and Division I basketball, particularly athletes of color, often are underrepresented in NCAA's current structure. Separating FBS football governance could and should increase the opportunity for athlete representation, especially among Black college athletes who make up more than half of the FBS football player field. Now let's look at the next steps to move these recommendations forward. The commission is committed to playing a leading role to facilitate progress and we offer several suggestions as next steps. First, the commission will convene an FBS presidential summit for leaders to consider these recommendations and the creation of an independent special task force that would develop the NCFA. This task force should include independent experts, including former college football athletes. Second, the NCAA should immediately implement the revenue distribution changes previously recommended by the commission as outlined by the esteemed Dr. Cartwright. Third, the CFP should implement changes to its revenue distribution also proposed by the commission in the second session of the series. Those changes would support initiatives for improving diversity in football coaching leadership and supporting national health and safety initiatives for football athletes. These are the type of values-based allocations that the new NCFA will need to consider. Finally, the NCAA should appoint a group to consider the constitutional and bylaw changes that will be needed to provide equal conference governance representation centered around basketball and not football. Now, Knight Commission Co-Chair Arne Duncan will provide concluding thoughts before we take your questions.
Thanks, Jacques, for all your leadership. And I want to thank all of you for staying with us. This is a lengthy, detailed presentation. As he said, I'm the last speaker, and then we'll get to Q&A after that. Our commission recognizes that far-reaching governance reform will not take place overnight. At the same time, it believes that discussions on a new governance structure for Division I can, should, and must begin immediately. Governance reform is urgent, not a wish list item to consider sometime down the road. Even prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, many Division I athletic programs were already hemorrhaging money, raising student fees to inappropriate levels, spending beyond their means for coaching salaries and gilded facilities, while shortchanging or even dropping Olympic sports. None of that is acceptable from a values-based standpoint. Moreover, upcoming media contract renegotiations, including the CFP's contract, threaten to widen financial inequities in a governance system that provides little accountability for improving athletes' education, health, safety, and success. If implemented, our commission's governance recommendations would represent a huge step forward, a leap forward for Division I sports. As the presentation highlights, now is the time for big solutions. That's what people are looking for, big solutions, not incremental changes. Now is the time for leaders to step up, to take ownership and shape the future of college sports. And we all know that if university and college sports leaders fail to act, the future of college sports will be in the hands of Congress and the courts to redesign. The cost of inaction, of maintaining the status quo, is both too high and untenable for all the reasons the commission has outlined. As we think about governance reform of Division I sports, it's critical that higher education leaders not fall into the trap of letting the elusive perfect become the enemy of the greater good. We're at a moment of both real crisis and tremendous opportunity in college sports. Now is not the time to think only of narrow institutional interests. Now is the time for college leaders to step up and act on the desire to move forward with big solutions to benefit college athletes. Change is never easy. This won't be easy. It will take both real courage and leadership. But I believe, and our entire commission believes, that college leaders can act to renew and preserve Division I athletics as a public trust. This concludes our formal presentation. I just want to thank all my fellow commission members for their hard work and leadership. I can say very honestly, I've never been more proud to be a small part of this commission than I am today. I want to turn it over to our Knight Commission CEO, Amy Perko, who's done just an extraordinary job leading us to get to this point to provide directions on our Q&A session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arne. And before we take your questions, I'd like to remind you that our report, Transforming the NCAA D1 Model, Recommendations for Change, will be accessible on our website, knightcommission.org, at the conclusion of this presentation. In terms of the Q&A, all of the presenters will be available to answer questions. If you have a question, please click on the Q&A icon on your control panel. Please identify your affiliation and identify the presenter to whom the question is directed. I'll turn it over to our moderator, Jenny Terzano, to start the Q&A.
Thank you, Amy. We have several terrific questions. I'm going to start with this one. The recommendations that you've made are significant. What is the reality on whether you think D1 leaders will actually act on this, consider it, or even agree to it?
Well, I think I'll jump in first and then turn to Carol and Nancy if they want to add some comments. Many of our Knight Commission members have served or continue to serve at the highest levels of university administration, as well as many have been very experienced in the NCAA governance. And so we know what can be accomplished. As our presentation highlighted today, the governance structure has really evolved over time. And we see this as another evolution. Throughout the commission's history, we've made bold proposals that, quite frankly, sometimes have been seen as unrealistic. I think one of the best examples may be in 2001 when the commission basically said graduation rates must improve, and the commission recommended that postseason eligibility be restricted only to those teams that can achieve graduation rates of their athletes better than 50%. At the time, that was actually seen as idealistic and unrealistic, but we know that that recommendation took hold. And now that policy, frankly, is one of the key drivers that we've seen in record high graduation rates, really improving the lives of thousands of college athletes. Carol, I don't know if you have a comment you want to add to that?
Actually, you did a great job, Amy. I would have reinforced this point that often when we've made recommendations, people have thought that they were kind of pie in the sky. But as more people have gotten into the discussion, the ideas have taken hold and they've been fundamental in creating real change. Another point I'd make is that these recommendations are derived from a year of very careful study and research. Many of them prompted by the kinds of concerns that were revealed in our focus groups with presidents and in our survey. So we think that they're grounded in attitudes of leaders who will take up the opportunities for change.
I would add, as Carol knows well, we're not just dropping a report into the stratosphere and walking away from these decisions and recommendations. We want to play a convening role, if you can, a mediating role, bring presidents to the table. In the end, this is presidential decision making. And really our timing couldn't be better because through Mark Emmert and the NCAA, there's a presidential forum that is pushing around, debating some of these issues. We know that January is a convening moment for the NCAA. So we have the audience and I think we will have, because this is what it's really going to take, collective will to get it done and get it done right.
We have several questions related to Title IX, and they aren't all asked by women either. So I'm combining several questions into one, Amy, and I'll start off here. You all mentioned that this will offer more gender equity, but how do you completely separate D1 football governance structure, allowing schools to be compliant with Title IX? Essentially, all of those schools will be providing one sport with a different level of experience that's not available for a proportionate number of female athletes.
Well, I'll jump in first, and you know, Peter spoke to this in the AD's Q&A portion from an AD's perspective, and you know, where the commission started is with principles, and one of the core principles is that the governing entities must comply with Title IX, and on campus, Title IX will still apply. So regardless of, the governing entity that particular sport may be governed by, Title IX regulations on campus governance still apply. So I don't know if others, this is an issue that we obviously talked a lot about, but it goes back to the principle that doesn't change.
Amy, if I could also just add that it's important to remember that Title IX is a federal requirement and not something that's required necessarily by the NCAA and membership inclusion. It's a federal expectation that's in the tax code to not discriminate based on gender. And so those federal requirements would remain.
Great, thank you. John Affleck is asking, first he says, thank you for the detailed report. And for anyone who wants to jump in here to his question, what incentive do the Power 5 conferences have to give up their voting power advantage? He is with the Knight Chair in Sports Journalism Society at Penn State.
Sure, I'll jump in there that, and others can add to this, but clearly, as was pointed out, our survey indicated, and our survey had Power 5 respondents participate in that, and there was no clear, solution identified by an overwhelming majority, but the overwhelming majority did say we need big solutions, and there was consensus around the problems. And so, the current structure is weighted toward Power 5. But again, ultimately leadership requires looking at the big picture and what is in the best collective good of college sports. All college sports leaders want to see college sports and the experiences of athletes continue to improve and leave college sports better than when they started as leaders. And so I think we all recognize, that again, if the leadership in college sports fails to act, Congress and the courts will redesign the structure. And so it's up to those who know the system the best to provide leadership. And again, we've seen the evolution of the governance over time, and this is another evolution that needs to happen.
Good, thank you. Dennis Dodd has a question. Does someone else want to jump in?
Well, I was just going to refer back to how challenging it was to make the decisions that we've had to face during this global pandemic. I think the manner in which the NCAA addressed the March Madness decision was coherent and immediate. The manner in which the decisions had to be made relative to whether or not we're going to play football and what the circumstances and conditions would be, on top of what are we going to do with all of our student body, means that we've got a sort of fractured decision-making process, and an incentive for presidents and chancellors has, in their own administrative life, is to get coherent around decision-making and not have it be scattered. And I think that can be a big incentive for cleaning up, if you will, dividing these issues in a clear way that delegates clear decision-making pathways.
Thank you, Nancy. Dennis Dodd is asking whether the Knight Commission has an opinion of what college football looks like as a separate entity. Do you care that if that entity pays players, increases the size of the regular season and or playoffs? And finally, would a separate entity necessarily preempt a need for an antitrust exemption for the schools for name, image, and likeness?
I think it's important to point out that one of our major recommendations is the set of 10 principles, and our clear statement that those principles or something very much like those principles would apply both to the NCAA and to the new NCFA. And we've clearly laid out our sense of what those principles should be. For example, we've said that there shouldn't be pay for play. We've said that athletes should be able to get benefits tethered to education, et cetera. And you can go back and review those principles, but they are a core part of this recommendation. It's not just about the reorganization into the NCFA. It's about adopting and accepting and living by those principles, both for the NCAA and for the NCFA.
Thank you. There have been several questions about concern over schools dropping sports. If you could jump in and ask and respond to whether this action by the recommendations by the Knight Commission would make it more likely for schools to drop various sports.
Well, we don't think so. And I'll state a couple of things that we went through in our session 2, where we offered some suggestions for changes to revenue distribution, starting with number 1, removing FBS football factors from the NCAA's revenue distribution because it technically doesn't meet the criteria to count, since the NCAA doesn't offer that national championship, doesn't control that national championship, and that is one of the NCAA's criterion. The net result of that would free up tens of millions of dollars that the NCAA then can use in a values-based revenue distribution. One idea that we put out there that we think, and we heard lots of great responses from individuals who are really concerned about the reduction of opportunities in Division I, and that is things could be done to better incentivize broad-based sport opportunities just with that simple change in the revenue distribution. But we could also, the system could also do things like, providing more incentives for schools to continue to offer a broad range of sports. So it provides an opportunity to re-examine that and to really ask the question, where are our values? Do we still value broad-based opportunities? And then to back that up with the revenue distribution and the incentives. And again, one other aspect that Peter touched on, and Peter, you may have some comments about this. This provides really a reset opportunity. There are a number of conferences that have structured themselves around the football TV footprint. And it doesn't make sense for all the other sports that you know, are looking for ways to continue to provide these important leadership opportunities for young men and women, but to do so in a more cost-effective way. So it provides a reset to say, hey, you know, it may not be in the best interest of our values and our goals here to have everything follow our football affiliation.
Yeah, Amy, I was just going to say that our survey results suggest that people are looking for the opportunity to do more geographic play and competition and a better alignment around the shared values and not to ask teams to travel across the country, but to play more geographically. So I think to your point, the survey results support that desire as well.
Matt Brown with Extra Points is asking if the new proposed motto continues to house all current D1 institutions in all current NCAA sports, but will break down A5 voting powers, how will concerns over shared values, resource disparities be alleviated? Would they not still exist?
Well, I'll jump in first, but again, the reorganized NCAA governance that we're proposing reorganizes again the governance around basketball. Again, all Division I schools have one thing in common, and that is they offer the sport of basketball. That is the only sport that 100% of the members offer. And so that's, and as we said, that is also funds most of the NCAA's operations and provides the revenue. So again, the reorganization around that provides that governance structure a better opportunity to really focus on the integrity of that sport and the 30 plus other sports that, you know, quite frankly, don't get enough attention under this, under the current model. Arne, did you have something you wanted to add with that?
Yeah, just to quickly add that I think it's so important that people understand that good governance is good governance. And that's in the nonprofit world, that's in the corporate world. And this governance structure has been broken. It's been, you know, disproportionately controlled by those with a small interest in not looking out for every athlete and every sport across the board. And if there was a commitment to doing the types of things we're talking about, a majority of independent members, Jacques talked about the need for more student athletes and student athletes of color to be represented. If you had that more broad-based governance group that could think long-term and think strategically, not think in terms of self-interest, so many of these challenges that we're faced with today, I think over time would find a way to resolve themselves with better values-based leadership.
I don't want to talk out of turn, but I'm going to back up Amy and Arne right here, because I mean, what we're trying to recommend here is not just the wild, wild west. What we see is an opportunity for better alignment. And the CFP operates outside of the NCAA. So the Power 5 football just sits on the fringe of the NCAA for better or worse, right? So, you know, I see Division I men's basketball and basketball in general, as Amy said, is 100% represented throughout the NCAA. So the NCAA has alignment and autonomy over that. Whereas with the Power 5 football, it's kind of just on this fringe, kind of have oversight and kind of don't have oversight. So when we say the NCFA, we don't want to create the wild, wild west. Just like Arne said, good governance is good governance. And there's going to have to be guardrails and things in place to make everything equitable and properly aligned. But we just see it as an opportunity, and right, especially during right now, as this pandemic has shown that the opportunity is ripe for change. And this could be an opportunity just for better autonomy and alignment for both sides. So just wanted to mention that.
Amy, we're going to have to wrap up, but I'd like to ask one last question, which is, have you discussed this with the NCAA, and what are the next steps over these recommendations?
Yes, I'll briefly answer, and then I'll turn to Nancy. We met with the NCAA, Mark Emmert, earlier today and shared our recommendations, so they were aware of those, as we have, you know, throughout our series with the different research projects that we've conducted that have contributed to these recommendations. We will be presenting to the Division I Presidential Forum, so that's a great opportunity to share these ideas with those leaders. And I'll turn to Nancy for some closing thoughts on next steps.
Well, thank you, Amy. Our report does conclude with what we feel is our responsibility to play a convening role in this conversation. So the idea is that we would convene presidential leaders to then create a sort of second tier, which is a task force of some form to really hash out the National College Football Association organization, character, governance, how it will lift up the principles that we've identified. And all along, trying to stay in conversation with the NCAA and other interested parties. And I think it's likely that that will just begin almost immediately, so that by the first of the year, we can convene that first conversation and get to the formation of such a task force, which would require everybody's input. And I think you've heard the term collective will, to stand up for the public trust invested in us for the leadership in collegiate athletics. So that's our plan, and we hope that the many constituents parties, particularly our presidents and chancellors, will lead the way.
Great, thanks everyone. Thanks again for joining this presentation today. And this session completes our 4-part series. All the other sessions and the materials presented during those sessions are accessible on our website, knightcommission.org. And as previously noted, you can also find our Transforming the NCAA D1 Model report on that website as well. We want to thank you for attending, and any media inquiries for follow-ups, contact Fred Fromer at the email address listed there. Thank you again.